I love Bleach. Tite Kubo's magnum opus has always caught my attention more than any of its contemporaries due to how it expounds upon themes and ideas that, at least in my time with Battle Shounen, have always been atypical in primary pursuit, and how those themes form a skeletal structure that is constantly supporting the rest of its narrative at large. I think Bleach can best be distilled into two core theme statements. Firstly, when faced with the inevitable nature of death, one should strive to embrace the life they have left and relentlessly walk forward until their final days. And secondly, that what defines a good life is sincerity to oneself, the ability to embrace who you are and proudly stand by yourself and your ideals. These ideas manifest themselves through every character in the story, and every arc leads back to these core conclusions. This makes Bleach feel cohesive, like one body of work that is constantly acting in a single pursuit. Hence why I equate the thematic scaffolding to a strong skeleton. These ideas support every aspect of the narrative more thoroughly than not only most other battle shonen, but than many narratives at all. Orihime has to deal with the pain of being left behind by her older brother. Uryu left vindictive after losing his grandfather to injustice. Chad defines his entire personality based on his deceased grandfather's kindness and ideals, striving to be like him to a fault. And Ichigo is forever haunted by his inability to have saved his mother, watching his sisters grow up without knowing their mom, and his father live without the love of his life, and blaming himself for that emptiness. You can see it so far back as the very first chapter, where Ichigo is overwhelmed with guilt when Rukia so much as insinuates that a hollow came for him and now his family is hurt. Taking the entire Substitute Shinigami arc on the macro, you can see that each member of the core cast is confronted with loss, only to ultimately realize that more worthy than living in service of the dead is to protect the living. You can't do anything about the past or take back what's been lost, but you can let that inform how you act in the present, which is exactly what leads them to infiltrating Soul Society, to deny grief and preserve what's right in front of them. Extend this idea outward and you see that it never ends. Rukia and Ukitake are chased by the death of Kai and Shiba. Tosen's path in life is decided by the death of his friend in his pursuit of justice. Gin is so scared of losing Rengiku that he throws his will and integrity away. And Yuhabak himself only acts to break the cycle of life and death for fear of the finite. The story doesn't center around Grim Reapers without reason. Death is a constant force in the narrative. But for all of the cast, there is ultimately a single resolution they reach: to live. You either learn to move on and keep walking, like Byakuya eventually does after the death of his wife, or you're so broken by your loss that you self-destruct like Komamura and Tosen. The resounding message is that life is most worth living when you're doing it for yourself. That doesn't mean that you can't protect others. That's Ichigo's entire purpose. But you need to do so not to avenge the ghosts of the past, but because you yearn for the living. You have to chase your own happiness instead of lamenting the happiness of those who are already gone. Self-actualization. That's a good way to put Bleach's other core idea of sincerity. Ichigo and Chad are largely defined by how they stick out from society. Rather than trying to bend at the knee and blend in though, they stay genuine and because of that are able to find people who accept them. Renji and Byakuya need to learn to fight for what they actually believe in, rather than what they're told to believe in. That's the core development for almost every member of the Gote 13 in the Soul Society arc. Izuru and Shuhei's arcs in Karakura Town are about doubling down on their ideals, and standing by their belief that the world is better without fighting, living that contradiction only so that one day their peace can be achieved and others won't have to fight. And on the other side of the coin, we see that Gin and Aizen put up facades to deal with their issues and conflicts. Their insincerity was their downfall. Gin had good intentions, but instead of following his heart and fighting at Rengiku's side, he isolated himself in his own happiness until he was no longer the kind of person that could ever be with her. Whether he failed to realize or simply denied himself the happiness of knowing that she loved him too, we can't know. It is not frightening to know misfortune. What is frightening is to know lost happiness will never come back again. Aizen wanted someone to understand him because, like Ichigo, he was different from everyone around him, and yet he did nothing but lie, as he feared with each passing day that no one would ever reach that understanding. The same can be said about Kenpachi, who denies himself what he truly desires, to fight with all he has and prove himself, in fear that if he truly showed his strength, no one would ever understand him ever again. Thankfully for him, he had Unohana to teach him that that wasn't true. And it's only when he reaches these conclusions that he can reach out to his Zanpakuto. The Zanpakuto as a concept is an expression of this theme. Your sword is an extension of yourself and your soul. You get stronger by growing closer to your Zanpakuto, which means you get stronger by understanding yourself. Renji unlocks Bankai only when he stops trying to convince himself that killing Rukia is right and follows his heart instead. And Ichigo is only able to reform his Zanpakuto in the war after finally accepting every aspect of himself. Cause you see, Ichigo, he's constantly struggling against these ideas. He fights the Grand Fisher with rage and vengeance like Komamura in the war, and isn't able to beat it because of that. He still hasn't accepted and moved past his mother's death, turning to anger as a way of coping. Ichigo claims to want a quiet life at the beginning, but that's just because the world wouldn't leave him alone and he hadn't built a support network. When he decides to save Rukia, it's both a reflection of his growing outlook on life, as well as a clear sign of his wounds still lingering. He wants to save her, to protect the living as opposed to avenge the dead, but he's so determined only because he feels that he needs to save her. Ichigo protects people out of fear that he'll make the same mistakes over and over again, which is why it's so important that he does save Rukia. And along the way, he learns that he doesn't just feel an obligation to protect people, that his mother would never forgive him otherwise, but that he simply likes to do it. That's a nuanced distinction. The two states of being are functionally pretty similar, but the key difference is the whole point: sincerity and actively living for yourself. Still though, Ichigo rejects his hollow. He rejects the violent parts of himself because fighting is bad, right? Right? But Ichigo learns to see it for what it really is, just another form of communication. He learns that he understands people, why they fight and what they're fighting for, best while fighting them. Again, he must stop denying himself simply because of preconceived notions. When Aizen is defeated and Ichigo returns to a normal life, he now has everything that he originally claimed to want. He's made friends and found a place in the world. Except that's not really what he wants at all. It was never what he wanted. What he wanted was happiness with the people he cared for, to face adversity head-on by their side. He didn't want to avenge his mother. He wanted to be his mother, protecting the ones he holds dear too. It's why he's so frantic to embrace his Fullbringer power, as it's all that he has left after the fallout with Aizen. Ichigo doesn't want to give up on that dream. It's no wonder that Zangetsu changes form when Ichigo does in fact get it back. He has at last realized who he is and what he wants to be. Ultimately, Ichigo denies Yhwach's deathless utopia at the end of the Thousand-Year Blood War. At the beginning of the narrative, though, Ichigo may well have sided with the Quincy. He lamented his ability to see the dead because it made him different from others. But in Yhwach's world, there would be no distinction between life and death, nothing to other him. Ichigo mourned the death of his mother for years, but in Yhwach's world, there would be no more loss, no need to fear death. But Ichigo at the end rejects stagnation. He rejects a world where nothing changes in lieu of the boundless possibility of the future. And in the future, you're going to lose things. You'll have painful and awful experiences alongside joyous and marvelous ones. But that's life. You'll never gain anything without accepting that you'll lose things too. So Ichigo denies eternity. He cherishes the bonds that he has, and as a child to continue the cycle of life. And I find that journey of an outcast, looking for a place to die, growing into a hero that cherishes every moment that he is alive, to be very beautiful. Because in the end, the boy learns to live. The peasants grow so their suffering won't be propagated again. The man with every reason to have hate in his heart realizes that what made his idol great wasn't who he was, but what he believed in. The girl who was always protected gains the strength to shield those who saved her. And an immortal god learns that death is something precious, because it means that you are alive, that you lived, and that true strength comes from learning to understand others and in turn understanding yourself. Accept yourself. Accept yourself. Accept yourself. Accept yourself. Accept yourself. Only then can you look death in the eye and smile, knowing that you have the strength to overcome. We have a word for that ability. They say we call it courage. Thank you.